Well, it's February the 15th, 2024. I am fortunate enough to be here with Mr. Bruce Norton. Mr. Norton, when and where were you born?
I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, March 3rd, 1948. I've got a birthday coming up in 2 weeks, and I'll be 76 years old.
Happy early birthday, sir.
Thank you.
Well, in growing up in the 50s and the 60s, did you have any family, friends, or even family members that
Uh-oh,
were
you're
veterans of
frozen.
Oh, you're fine, sir.
I just froze for a second. Go ahead.
Did you have any family friends or family members who were veterans of World War II?
I did. The family goes all the way back to Mary Allerton, who was the youngest girl on the Mayflower.
Wow.
So my grandfather was in World War One with the 26th Infantry Division, and my dad was in World War II with the 198th Coastal Artillery Regiment. I had an uncle in Korea, and it was my turn for Vietnam.
Well, like many of your generation, that's a long family heritage of military service and very prideful as well, wanting to follow in those footsteps.
Well, it's interesting. My grandfather's letters to his father uh, talked about Edward and Andrew Maker, who were with 19th Maine during the Civil War, here in Fredericksburg and ended up at Appomattox. And they were at Gettysburg. So interesting family history,
Well,
militarily.
most certainly. I mean, I can relate the same. I've traced my roots, of course, back to the American Civil War. I had my ancestors fought on the opposing side of that, North Carolina regiments, but same as well. My family's been a part of every major conflict that's happened in the history of the United States to the American Civil War.
Yeah, it's something to be very proud of. So,
Um, One of my driving factors of why I love history. But for you growing up in this period, what was your childhood like? What hobbies did you have as you became a teenager with sports or being outdoors? What'd you do?
well, I grew up in a rural setting. It was a village of North Situate, which is about 10 miles west of Providence. My father worked for the Narragansett Electric Company. He was what you'd call a rural serviceman. So he'd be the guy that would come out and hook up uh, your electricity to your home, your meters, transformers. If there was an accident and a pole was hit, he had another gentleman he worked with, and they would reset the poles. So he was on the go out of doors all the time. The setting was a very rural area. We lived right on the edge of the Situate Reservoir, which provides all the water for the people of Providence. So it was a great place to grow up. There were signs posted that said no trespassing, no hunting, fishing, camping, all the things you weren't allowed to do. And we did all of them. So, the only thing that kept us from going on the reservoir property was a stone wall. And we just hop over it, and that's where the best fishing was, and hunting. I mean, the hunting was small game stuff, rabbits and uh, squirrels and that kind of stuff. There were very few deer back then, and no turkeys. But now there's turkeys all over the state. They've done a great job with the National Wild Turkey Federation, and plenty of deer. So it was great, and I had a close uh, group of friends. I still keep in touch with many of them. And I had an older sister and a younger sister. They're both alive and well. My parents have both passed away. So it was great. It was a small town. Everyone knew everyone. I went to the same uh, high school class with kids that I was in the first grade with. So we all knew one another very, very well. And it was a small high school. I think a graduating class was 100 students. And the sports that were played were, of course, football, basketball, baseball. They had track and tennis, but there's no swimming, uh, no lacrosse, uh, no hockey team for the school, but we played hockey in the winter as often as we could. So it was great. It was a lot of fun growing up back then, and occasionally I get back up to Rhode Island, and things have changed considerably, but it's still a small town, and there are people up there that I've known since I was a little kid.
Well, I mean, being from a small town, a conflict like Vietnam will hit hard in small towns. You know, when guys get killed or wounded, everyone knows.
We had the first word of a casualty was a young guy named Joey Knoll, and he was killed, and he was killed by friendly fire. Artillery rounds came into where he was, and that was kind of a shocker, But back then, and this is right in the uh, early to mid 60s, our school curriculum was developed for 3 courses of uh, of action, if you would. They had general studies, then they had business studies, and then people who were bound for college. And that's the way the courses were taught. So back then, every parent did not want their kids to go to Vietnam. So they pushed hard for sons and daughters to go to college or some other form of community college, and it was a big deal. So I went to school. I left high school. I went to school in Boston, and I was in my sophomore year, second semester, and the writing on the wall was very plain. I had a professor come in and say to me, uh, Mr. Norton, never have I seen anyone work so hard and have so little to show for it. So that was kind of the you should not be here. You're taking up a seat that someone could use. So I went down and enlisted, literally left school, and like the following day went down. My goal was to enlist in the Marine Corps, and because I had friends that left high school and went right into the Marine Corps, and they had corresponded with me telling me what that was like for them, and they were then in Vietnam. But the day I went down to see the recruiter, the Marine staff sergeant was delayed for some reason. He wasn't there, and this Navy chief came out and said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Come on in here and let me talk to you." And he sold me on going into the Navy, and I signed the papers and joined the United States Navy. And the goal was that I'd become a hospital corpsman, and that's exactly what happened. So I enlisted. I went to Great Lakes Naval Training Center, went to A school, which was there. So you learn the ins and outs of how to function as a corpsman in a hospital. And after I graduated from A school, I went to Field Medical Service School, which is down in your state at Camp Lejeune. And that was a preparatory 1 month course to teach Navy corpsmen how to function within a Marine rifle platoon. Because back then in 1966 and 7, uh, corpsmen received 2,000 Purple Hearts in 1 year. So you could tell that it was risky business being a Navy corpsman in a Marine rifle platoon. So ultimately, I left Field Medical Service School and I went to my next duty station, which was Naval Hospital, Newport, Rhode Island, which was right back where I'd come from and not my idea of seeing the world. So I was assigned to a dirty surgery ward, which was Ward D. We had a 22-bed ward, and most of the patients were Marines who had come back wounded with some kind of infection in the wounds after surgery. And there were probably 6 of us who had volunteered to go to Vietnam. So as soon as we did that, they took us off the ward, and we all had duty in the emergency room at the Naval Hospital. And the reason was the doctors who ran the emergency room had all come from Vietnam. They were either with 3rd Med Battalion, 3rd Medical Battalion, and I'll try to explain the acronyms, or 1st Med Battalion, 1st Medical Battalion. 3rd was with the 3rd Marine Division, and 1st was the Medical Battalion for the 1st Marine Division. So I got orders to Vietnam and went through Okinawa, showed up at Da Nang, flew up to a place called Dong Ha, and I had orders to report to the division surgeon. And being naive, I actually thought that I was going to see this surgeon, and that never happened. So I went into the receiving tent, and there was a 2nd-class corpsman in there, and he said, "Can you swim?" And I said, "Sure, I can swim." And he said, "Are you afraid of height?" And I said, "Well, I don't think anyone's real comfortable on the roof of a house, but it doesn't bother me that much." And he said, "Well, here's the deal." He said, "Last night we lost a corpsman in an incoming rocket attack over 3rd Force Recon, and we need to replace him. You'd have to volunteer for that. Would you be willing to do that?" And I said, "Yes." So I reported in the next morning. I'd gone over to 3rd Med Battalion, 3rd Recon Battalion, and ran into a couple of corpsmen that I'd known at the Naval Hospital in Newport. And they said, "Where are you going? You coming here?" And I said, "No, I'm going to 3rd Force." And they said, "Well, that's a couple of 100 yards away." There was concertina wire that separated us from them for no particular reason. Just it was the outline of who owned that property. So I reported into 3rd Force Recon. And that was on a Sunday morning. And on Wednesday, I was with a 7-man reconnaissance team going out across the DMZ into North Vietnam.
Wow.
So the on-the-job training was very, very quick. And of course, as a new guy, you were told that you will not do anything unless you are told to do it. There's no talking whatsoever. It's all hand and arm signals, which we knew from field med school. And the team leader was a sergeant named Chapman. And the first mission was pretty interesting. We get into a bunker complex that the NVA had put anti-personnel and anti-tank mines in. We left there and got into a firefight. We got into a series of firefights, and were on the run literally for about 3 days. The helicopters that came in to get us extracted, our helicopter took an RPG round through the back cowling. And while we were inside the helicopter, the pilot, co-pilot, crew chief, and gunner ran off the helicopter to an awaiting helicopter. And we were told to pull the 50 caliber machine guns out of the ports and run them on board the other helicopter to get out of there, which we did. And then Phantoms came in and destroyed the helicopter that we were in. And I'm thinking, after watching all this happen in front of me, I'm thinking, I've still got 13 more months to do with this organization. So pretty exciting stuff when you're 19 years old.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well,
So
even in training as a corpsman, had you heard about Force Recon at that point?
yes, there were a couple of corpsmen at the Naval Hospital, and they would have sessions with us saying, "Look, if you go to Vietnam, here's the difference. If you go with an infantry platoon, you carry everything you own, and the clanging and banging and the noise you make, it alerts everyone that you're coming. Okay, but you're a serious force because a platoon would be 30 Marines, maybe reinforced with mortars and machine guns. But in a reconnaissance organization, it's all stealth. So the idea was, and the mission was, to go and find the North Vietnamese, report on what you saw, where they were going, what their intent may be, depending on what they were carrying with them, and not to engage in a firefight, mainly because there's only 6 of you. That was the standard size, was 6 men. Because if one guy was sick, injured, wounded, or killed, you've lost your capacity to engage by 50% because it's going to take two guys to carry the wounded guy. So now out of six, you've only got three who can function, you know, as as they're supposed to. And when you've got someone who is wounded or dead, they're a liability. They're no asset to you. All they are is, pardon the term, dead weight. So you immediately split up their gear, particularly food, water, and ammunition, and radio batteries and that kind of stuff, or any kind of serialized stuff like binoculars or a starlight scope, and got that guy ready for an immediate extraction. So the problem there is now your team is exposed because here comes a helicopter in to get your guy out of there. So it's a delicate dance that you do, but the idea is go out and find them, uh, report on what you're seeing, and if the weather is good, we'll get you out of there because helicopters couldn't fly at night, not particularly well, or in heavy rain, and that was the limitation. So our normal missions ran 5 to 7 days was pretty much normal, depending upon the terrain. But everyone was in excellent shape. All these guys were in top physical condition. A lot of them had been to jump school, scuba school, ranger school, and uh, and the officers that we had were superb, and they were all extremely well versed in jungle warfare. And the classes we held, we trained all the time, uh, were conducted by Marines who had had at least one, if not two, tours over there, all in the reconnaissance business.
Well, with that, I mean, the expertise that they're bringing into the field, what you're learning on the job through those men, I mean, you can't get that anywhere else. You don't get that in boot camp. You don't get that necessarily in AIT. That's learned on the job by those who have seen it.
Well, I look back on it um, now at almost 76, and we were pretty much 19 and 20, 21 years old. And what we did, what was expected of us then, today is miraculous. I mean, we were carrying 75 pounds of gear. You'd carry 6 to 8 canteens. You'd carry 25 magazines, either an M16, an M14, sometimes an M60 machine gun. Uh, the heat and the terrain were factors as to how fast you could move. Um, and you were really tired at the end of the day. And then you had to stay up all night on radio watch. And you'd pass that off every 30 minutes. So you'd be waking some guy up to stay awake. And what we had to protect us was one, the radio, but two, electronic gear. They were called, in our terminology, PSIDs. It was a patrol seismic intrusion device. What that was a small box with an antenna, and you would set out four of them, northeast, south, and west of your harbor site. Harbor site is where you slept at night, in the thickest, densest brush you could find so that you couldn't be seen. There was no talking, no smoking, no flashlights, no light of any kind. And these PSIDs would pick up any vibration. So if someone was coming, let's say from north to south of argument, the north PSID would beep twice. Then the southern PSID would beep 4 times. So you'd hear every footstep, beep, 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 beep. And once they crossed that interlocking circle of radius of sensitivity, then it would go beep, 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 beep. So now you know they've crossed whoever's looking for you, either east to west, north to south, or north to east. And behind each of these PSIDs was a Claymore mine. So in the harbor site, on your radio handset, you had a receiver to listen to these beeps, if there were any, all night long. And if the NVA or the VC were closing in, you had four hell boxes, and these hell boxes were electrical contacts, and you'd squeeze them, and they would fire off the Claymore mine, and you'd fire all four at the same time, and that would give you, we estimated, 2 to 3 minutes of time to get all your gear back on and get the hell out of there. So that was our protection at night. But the beauty of it was everyone cross-trained everyone else. So your team leader would have courses on map and compass. The radio operator would teach everyone he knew about the radio, about how to preset frequencies, how to change the batteries, how to clean it. The corpsman would teach them all emergency first aid and what he carried in his unit 1, which is the medical bag. So everyone knew where everyone's gear was and what everyone was capable of doing. So everyone knew how to do calls for fire, how to contact artillery, helicopters, fixed wing, how to deal with the radio, how to waterproof it. And so the training was nonstop, and that's what kept you alive.
Well, and it brings up my curiosity. Speaking of the training, did your corpsman training in the States, did it have benefit to when you were in the field with Force Recon? I mean, were you prepared, at least in your opinion, when you reached Vietnam?
Yes and no. You could think that you were mentally prepared, but when you deal with your first person killed or wounded, everything changes. Now it's up to you to either stop the bleeding, get a medevac in, keep this man alive until he can get to a hospital. And that's a tremendous weight to put on anyone who's 18, 19, or 20 years old. At the same time, are you running with this guy who was wounded? Are you in a defensive position? What are your capabilities? Do you know that weapon well enough? Are your weapons cleaned and functioning? All these things go through your mind. And are you telling yourself, yes, I'm prepared for that, when in reality, no, you're not prepared for it until the situation develops. And then everyone is there to assist you as best they can. So it's always a team effort. And we practiced, as an example, we'd come out of the field, and the normal routine is you'd go to a debriefing right away. The entire team would be asked questions. What did you see? What did you do? What did you hear? And all this was recorded. Then you'd go back and you'd clean your gear first. All your gear was replaced if it needed to be, but cleaned and ready for an inspection. And then you cleaned yourself. So you'd go in after 7 days of being in the field. You were pretty ripe, and you wanted to take a shower. So you'd clean your gear. Lots of times you bring your weapon right into the shower with you and clean that with hot soapy water before you really get into the detailed cleaning. After that was over, we would do what was called IA drills, immediate action drills. So you'd put your gear back on and you load up with blanks in your magazine, and Marines who were not going to the field, they'd volunteer to have 4 or 5 guys hide in the area that we lived in. And as the team walked around the area, they'd be ambushed. And you would react to an ambush to the right, ambush to the left, ambush behind, repetitively until it was like second nature of, if someone's firing at you from the right side, how do you address that? And that's the drills that we would do. So the training was very, very intense, and it was nonstop. I mean, it was not like you came back and you laid in your bed waiting for the next mission to go on. It was not that way at all.
Well,
So go ahead.
I'm curious. I know about responding to ambush to the right, ambush to the left, but ambush to the rear, how do you react to that, at least in the training scenario?
Good question. The way the team is set up is important. Your point man, his responsibility is dead ahead, up above him, and to the right and to the left. Just makes sense. If you were the lead guy, you're looking all around, okay? Your next person would be the team leader. He's directing the point man where he wants to go, okay? Normally, my team leader carried his own radio. In other teams, a radio operator would be third in line and handing the team leader a handset. But that's a lot of movement, and you don't want a lot of movement, okay? So our team leader, Teddy Bishop, he carried his own radio. We carried his gear that replaced the radio in his pack, his food, his water, poncho liner, whatever it would be. So the third guy was usually me. Fourth man was a M79 Grenadier with M79 grenade launcher or Grenadier. We call him a blooper man. And then tail end, and he would be the assistant team leader. And tail end Charlie, he would reverse it. So if you had to turn and go back, now tail end Charlie, the last guy of six, is the point man. So everything is just in reverse order, back and forth. So you'd have the point man, the assistant team leader, the corpsman, and then the TL, the team leader, and then the point man is now tail end Charlie. So you can see it's a carbon copy of what's moving forward is the same thing that's going to be moving to the rear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean,
Okay.
that's awesome. And well, and two, I mean, I find it fascinating that within Force Recon and other teams as well, that you train on the weapons and roles of everyone around you. That way, if someone gets hit, you can do that job because it's necessary. I mean, like you point out, if the radio man goes down and no one knows how to operate the radio, how the hell do you call in fire support, supporting arms, fixed wing, and to get you out of there?
Well, we carried two radios, and everyone had a spare radio battery because our radios were on 24/7. And there was a time given when you would change the radio batteries. So you were down for, that might be 10 minutes. The radio operator would make sure the terminals were all cleaned, frequencies would change at night. And everyone knew this, and everyone had a memorandum book. So you would write down what the frequencies were for Scarface, which would be Cobra gunships, for slicks or dust off, which was your emergency uh, helicopters that would come in and pick up the wounded, fixed wing, uh, or OV-10 Broncos, which were aircraft prop driven that would have rockets on board that would mark targets for the fast movers that would come in. So it was a dance, and everything was coordinated if it worked well. But sometimes the dance didn't go that well. Bad weather. Now what do you do if someone's seriously wounded? It's bad weather. Um, to me, credit where credit is due. The United States Army flew us when we operated in the Ashore Valley, uh, and we were so happy with that because the Marines flying the CH-46s, the big, larger helicopter, required a bigger landing zone. The slicks, small Huey, would do what we call false inserts. So here you go out, uh, six guys on board, and the helicopter would go down as though it was landing and pop right back up again and go another half a mile away and go down again because the NVA were constantly watching. But when you see a helicopter go down 5 or 6 times, you can't send your people all over the place looking for where that team may have gotten off. So these helicopter pilots were usually Army warrant officers, 20, 21 years old, same age as us, but flying that Huey. And they would tell us, look, if things go really bad and you've got wounded and it's at night, you call us and we'll come out there. And when we come over to where we think you are, you'll give us what's called a mark on the radio. You just say mark, and squeeze the handset a couple of times. And they would throw on their landing lights and just sit down right on top of you to get the wounded guy out of there. Shut off the lights and fly out. The morale factor was tremendous because if you knew that you were sick uh, or injured, like a badly sprained knee or ankle or broken arm, if you had fallen off the side of a cliff kind of thing, and you weren't killed, but you're requiring hospitalization, and you knew that within an hour someone was coming out to get you, that's a tremendous morale factor. And I don't think we had that when the 46s came out, because when the CH-46s came out, those pilots requested colored smoke grenades. So you had green, red, purple, white, and you would mark the LZ. But if they saw that smoke, they would wait until they knew a helicopter was coming in, and then they would mortar it when it came in. But with the slick, I mean, it was fast and furious, and it was just a godsend. And those guys were as brave as anyone you could imagine to come out there with a pilot, co-pilot, and one guy, and usually he had a carbine, and he was a medic in the back of that slick, and that was it. It was just room enough for the wounded to get on board and get them out of there. So we still have reunions with Second and 17th Air Cavalry up at in Nashville, because they're out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky now, and they're just the greatest guys in the world, and we love them to death.
Well, first of all, it's incredible the interbranch connection there of Army and Marines, and of course Navy personnel with yourself coming together and one, trusting each other in that situation, but two, the reliability. I mean, it's incredible. And I think it highlights the point of how well the branches do work together when the shit hits the fan, uh,
Yep.
the trust that's needed there. And it brings up another point as well, is that, you mentioned that on the slicks, the medic's carrying a carbine. Well, as a corpsman, a doc, what are you carrying in the field with your personal protection?
I carried a 45. I had at least four magazines, an M16. Uh, we'd have four pouches. Each pouch had five magazines, 20 rounds each. We usually loaded 18, so you weren't crushing the spring in the magazine. And on each pouch were two hand grenades. So you'd have probably six grenades, a smoke grenade. Um, Up on your rig, which was a H harness, you'd have a K-bar inverted, and then a day-night flare taped to that. So if you needed the flare at night, there were three knobs on the day-night flare, and then oh, you can see a picture here of David Draper in the upper right. He's got a Swiss seat. There's a K-bar with a day-night flare. There's my K-bar, uh, Eddie Snowden, and this is Guillermo Silver. So M16, 40 millimeter grenade launcher. He's David Brown from Maine. David Draper's from Anniston, Alabama. Eddie Snowden, myself, and this was Staff Sergeant Beltrain, and this was Team Isthmus. This was taken at Conchen. No, actually, Quang Tri. Our rear was Quang Tri. I'm just looking at the hooch behind it, and that tells me exactly where it was.
Well, if I may say, and as I've warned my students and the viewers, it's a badass photograph, first of all. Just looking at it. But yeah, I mean, you've got the inverted K bar. We can see some of the equipment here, and if I'm not mistaken, that's Ertles that you're wearing, right? That early camouflage concept.
Yeah, and here's my camera. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but dead center and down below is my camera, because we always had at least one camera, which was an Iconis 2 underwater camera. And I don't know if we can say, okay, there's a smoke grenade up on my right side.
Sir.
And
Let's see.
a lot of these M16s, we took green duct tape and we'd put cleaning rod up and down the hand guards in case it was a broken extractor. And you'd run white tape up on the front sight. So at night you had something to sight in on. And I took my gloves off. That's why my hands are so white, but you can see camouflage on Beltrain's hands, and he's to my left, and on Snowden's hands as well. He's got uh, lateral slash camouflage paint on, and you'd set up your camouflage however you wanted it. There was no set uh, pattern for camouflage. It was just to break up the outline of your face and particularly your neck and behind your ears. So, and of course, down below, right in the middle of my chest is my Unit 1, and that was linked onto my H harness. So I never lost that. I always had that.
Well,
So,
go ahead, sir.
no, go ahead.
Well, I
I'm
was gonna
just
say,
looking at
well,
pictures of these guys.
I love I also love the bush hats, the uniqueness of how you can turn them at twisted angles, a variation to blend in with the terrain. I love it, especially Snowden's here. I mean, that's an awesome little setup he's got there for the bush hat. But at the same time, I mean, you're looking at excellent Marines and docs right here. I mean, we're looking at the best of the best.
Well, these covers, these bush covers, had a much wider brim. The first thing you did was uh, take a pair of scissors and cut the wide brim off. And Eddie Snowden's got his curled up to the side. So you knew just by seeing his cover, you knew exactly who he was. Um, Beltrain wore a regular soft cover. Some of these other guys up on top did as well. Brown's got a bush cover. Silver's got a bush cover. Draper's got a bush cover as well. But the normal issue, it was about another 3 inches out around the bush cover, and it was just too much. So you just want to cut it so that it was much easier to wear. Yeah,
Now,
that was a good team.
did you bring your bush cover home by chance? I know some guys kept theirs.
Here's here's today's bush cover kind of thing. If you can see that at all, you can see how wide the brim is. This is mine, kind of sun bleached from 54 years ago, but still, uh, that's the way you wore it. Yeah, you can't. Some of the stuff you don't get rid of.
Well, and with that, I mean, an awesome piece of history, a piece that's truly been there. As a historian, that's one of the things we crave is being able to interact with the artifacts that have been there, the stories that that hat could tell if it could talk. It's just phenomenal.
Well, I'll tell you, as a friend of mine, his name is Tommy Sexton, and Tommy lives down in South Carolina, just outside of the main gate at Paris Island. He was a radio operator, Lance Corporal, and on the 3rd of February, 1970, his team was inserted again in the Oshawa Valley. That was a very, very difficult place for us to work. Um, I'll tell you why in a little while. But his team was on the ground for a short period of time. They walked across the front of an NVA platoon that was dug in, and they were ambushed badly. Everyone was killed, with the exception of Sexton and another guy named Giuseppe Ventresca. Ventresca was an Italian. He wasn't a citizen. We had two of them, Ventresca and Antonaccio. But anyway, so Tommy has got his K-bar and his day-night flare, and he carries and always did carry an M14. He liked the 30 caliber much better, and you had a choice. But a larger rifle like that, you had larger magazines and heavier weight. That didn't bother him. He took a round that went through the day-night flare, broke the K-bar blade in half, hit him in the chest, and ricocheted back into the sheath. So he's the only guy functioning. Ventresca had been hit with a ricochet that hit him right between the eyes, and the bullet went under his scalp and out the back of his head, and he was unconscious. Sexton pulled everyone's body together and stacked it as a fort, if you would. He fired every man's weapon, threw all the hand grenades they had, and when he was hit, he got knocked over backwards, and the powder from the day-night flare, which is orange, mixed with the rain, and he thought he'd been badly hit in the chest, and he wasn't. Ultimately, Tommy got the Navy Cross and the Purple Heart, but he hung on to and was given that day-night flare and K-bar that's in a glass case that he has in his house. So, pretty interesting piece of memorabilia that saved your life.
Most definitely. I mean, that's incredible. And I don't think people understand the oddities of combat where that does indeed happen at times. I know I've spent a lot of time interviewing combat photographers, and they've told me, their cameras getting hit and stopping a bullet from hitting them, just oddities that you can't explain.
Yeah, yeah, one of the million. Well, our team, the very next day, actually, it was 7th of February, 1970. My team, which was Snaky, was ambushed, and Paul Kevaney was hit 5 times in one morning. So he took the first round in his, above his right knee, and he was an M79 Grenadier. And then when the automatic fire came in, it killed Arthur Garcia, the point man, Teddy Bishop, the team leader, and James Furman. Furman had taken my place because I was sent to scuba school. I was going through scuba school training, and it was the first mission I had missed in almost a year with that team. So, I get the radio report, the team's in contact. Uh, Kevin got hit in the right arm, the left arm, the right side, and this is over a period of like 3 hours. And then the fifth round hit him in the 45 and set off 2 rounds inside the magazine. So he's my son's godfather. I'm his son's godfather, and he's 83 and he's up in Westboro, Massachusetts, and doing fine.
Wow.
Yeah. So you never know. It's just the luck of the draw.
No kidding. I
Yeah.
mean, well, with that, and speaking of some of these dates, I know you mentioned, of course, February 1970 and the various teams you work with. What was the first day that you arrived in country?
Uh, what, the 8th of July, I think, 69. I know that we were out on the DMZ when Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon. We heard that on the radio. We didn't see it. We heard about it. But what makes it even more fascinating to me was Kevin's uh, parents owned a paint company in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, and his father and mother had won the contract for heat retardant paint for space vehicles, and they became millionaires. And Kevin's comment was, when that message was passed over the radio, he said, "My paint is on the moon." And so we get a kick out of that.
No kidding. Well, I mean,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
that's incredible to think about the fact that
Yeah.
you guys are along the DMZ, and he's just making a casual comment that, yeah, that's my paint up there. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. It was pretty interesting stuff.
Well,
So
that
yeah, July, uh, we did the DMZ, and then we moved from Quang down to Fubai, and then our team was the first team out around the Haivon Pass, which was north of Da Nang and south of Hue, and then we started uh, in the Ashura Valley. And I say it was difficult. It was a staging area, so between 40 and 80,000 NVA were in the Ashura Valley. The valley's about 12 miles, maybe 16 miles long, and from side to side, maybe 5 miles across. But Route 9 connected, and the Ashura Valley ran straight down past Hue, past Fubai, to Da Nang, and then down towards Saigon. So it was a main thoroughfare. They had trucks out there, and at night, they would throw on their lights. We didn't, but they did. And it looked like New York City compared to what we had seen before. There were thousands of NVA drivers, mechanics, I mean, infantry. It was a big, huge staging area. So it was risky business going out there, because they knew that we were coming out there. They weren't stupid. It was just trying to find us that made it difficult for them. So we pretty much stayed away from them. I mean, we get in a couple of good firefights with them, but our job was to break contact and get away from them as fast as we could and hide, and that's what we did.
Well, being that of course you're a corpsman, and I've talked to a couple of corpsmen who were with 1-4, 1-5, or 2-5 in itself. But
Yep.
being a corpsman with Force Recon, when you went out into the field, what kind of medical supplies are you having to carry to keep your people alive out there? Are you carrying extra than a standard corpsman would carry with the regular rifle platoon?
Every Marine has a first aid pack on the back of his web belt. So you would have bandages in there primarily. You could pack anything you wanted in there, but it was the season, whether it was hot or monsoon, because wasn't cold, really cold. Um, so you would carry halazone tablets for water purification, salt tablets if they wanted to take salt tablets, because you were burning through, um, at the risk of dehydration all the time. So water discipline was huge. Um, Bandages, hemostats to control bleeding, uh, tourniquet kit if you needed it, um, anything that you could carry brandy if you wanted little bottles of brandy. Sometimes in the morning, guy'd make a canteen cup of coffee, and you'd pour a bottle of one of those little airline 1 ounce bottles of brandy in it just to take the edge off, kind of thing. Um, but I mean, and then of course I would always carry morphine in my left breast pocket, and they knew where that was in case anyone was seriously wounded, minus a head wound. You wouldn't give it to someone if they had a head wound, but from the neck below, and then you would have a marker where you would mark T on a guy's forehead if there was a tourniquet. So when they brought him into the hospital, they'd look for a tourniquet if he had a T, or M for morphine, so they wouldn't overdose him with additional morphine if he was in a lot of pain. So it's just your standard stuff. I mean, it's not much different than the kind of first aid pack you might have in a SUV, today. So you'd have bandages, you'd have band-aids, you'd have uh, any kind. There weren't a lot of pills that were being taken. Maybe split fingers from water immersion, and you could put uh, bacitracin ointment on things if you needed it. Um, Tiny forceps to get splinters out of a face or an eye. Q-tips. Of course, everyone used Q-tips to clean their weapons with, so it's like you're out of Q-tips for anything to keep clean other than an M16 or an M60 or 45. But it was, just pretty much standard stuff that everyone understood what it was and what it was used for. But there was not a lot of pill type medication that guys carried. At least I didn't carry in my unit one. But you could carry anything you wanted. Tape was another big thing, in case you had to tape a bandage, because when it's pouring down rain, band-aids and things like that, they don't stick. I mean, you try to put a band-aid out in the rain, it's hopeless. So, it was just a custom design for what you wanted.
Well, and I was going to ask, I mean, on top of that, would you carry any chest seals out in the field for any kind of chest wounds, any time a lung gets hit or anything in that regard?
No, and I'll tell you, my experience here with 2 tours and being a team leader ultimately, um, I never lost a guy. I never had a guy uh, die on me. I medevac a number of guys who had been wounded. One guy had fallen down and broken a leg. So that was going to be, we had to put his M16 along his leg, minus the magazine, and taped to act as a splint. because he was going to have to walk with a broken leg until we could get to an LZ. So the LZ was not a place where the helicopter could land. They used a jungle penetrator. So out of the boom of this slick would be a jungle penetrator that would come down, say, 100 feet. And it was a triangular kind of a seat. And the guy would, straddle it, and he would be tied in with a Swiss seat and a carabiner and hoisted up and out of there. Because sometimes, we operated in triple canopy. So you'd have brush, small trees at 30 feet and bigger trees up to, say, 100 feet tall. Well, a helicopter can't get in there. So how do you get a wounded guy out? Jungle penetrator. So you'd have to call for one, not just a slick, but a guy with a jungle penetrator on it, be able to come in and do an extraction.
Well, it's brilliant and incredible to think about the technology behind that and the thought process of, in parts of Vietnam, there is no way of breaking down that triple canopy foliage. How do you get out wounded? And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. And it's especially important for the viewers to understand. It's not always this cleared wide LZ like you see in movies. Sometimes you don't have that at all. Um,
You'd
but
have to make it. We carried C4 plastic explosive with us, and we'd blow trees down if we needed to, which we did on one occasion in order for that helicopter to get in close. But now, again, talk about the training. What about the training of the helicopter pilot to be able to hover like that, send out a penetrator? He may be taking fire. So these guys are very, very courageous young men who are determined to get a wounded Marine out of there and waiting for a penetrator to go down rather slowly and then bring a guy up rather slowly and fly him to a hospital. And our closest hospital was about 35 or 40 miles away. So it's going to take some flight time to get a wounded guy out of the Asher Valley and over to 85th Evac Hospital in Phu Bai.
no kidding. I
Yeah.
mean, and with that too, I mean, just the skill of the aviation crews, Army, Marine alike in Vietnam, it's outstanding what young men were asked to do.
Well, that's an interesting point, and we always said when guys volunteered or wanted to come into Force Recon, it's it's not what we can do for you. It's what do you bring to us? What are your skills? And that was a deciding factor because it was you had to volunteer for it. They didn't want married guys. It was, as we say, risky business. It was difficult at best, and they didn't want a lot of writing letters home saying your dad was killed. Um, Unfortunately, much more acceptable if you're 18, 19, or 20 years old to become a casualty than a married guy with 2 or 3 kids at home. But, today it's an all volunteer force, and there are jobs like that, and the training is phenomenal. And I think a lot of the things that we did kind of set the course for the training that's done today. It's only lessons learned. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, but
Well, speaking of lessons learned, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not mistaken, your books are still widely read in the recon community.
I'll tell you, this is kind of I'm trying to think of the right terminology. Um, Self-serving, I guess. I have I'm working with a gentleman named Harry Kantrovich, PhD, former Navy man. And what happened was this: when I was at the history division, I was asked if I would help this nationally known playwright with a play that he had done called The Greatest Generation Speaks. And that's Tom Brokaw's book. Well, he knew Tom Brokaw, and he got permission to make his book into a play. So the actors and actresses would be the people that either wrote the letter home or received the letter. So at the end of this premiere, I was asked to be out on the stage and do a question and answer about Marine Corps involvement in the Pacific during World War II, which I did. So the audience was there. We had about 300 people in the theater. And dead center, front row, is Gary Sinise. So he's a big proponent of veterans type things. So Harry, in getting to know me, read a number of the books that I'd written, and he wanted to do a play on Force Recon. But he said, I can't really do it because there's not a lot of dialogue. You guys didn't talk a lot in the bush. Outside of the bush, yes. So he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to write a play called Voices from Vietnam, which we've done. And that play will premiere Veterans Day weekend here in Virginia, world premiere. And then it will run, we hope, in about 250 theaters around the country. So I wrote a book in support of the play because the play is 2 hours long and it requires only 18 actors and 8 actresses, them being the nurses or daughters of MIA or POWs. So the book is now going to the publisher tomorrow. That's Academica Press. And that's 354 pages long, 169 photographs. So we've got an admiral, general, Medal of Honor recipient, doctors, nurses, reconnaissance guys, POWs, families of MIAs, Vietnamese refugees, anti-war guys, because that was all part of it as well. There are a lot of people who were against the war, and they had a voice in this as well. So the book will come out in conjunction with the play, and it will be we've got an Australian infantryman. So everyone that had any kind of thing to do, as best that we could, we gathered up and made their submissions into this book. So if you read it, this is a nurse's reflections of things that she took away from Vietnam. A company commander in Hue City, who became a Marine general, Mike Downs.
Mike
So
Downs
he
is
was there
phenomenal.
with Ernie Cheatham and Ron Christmas. Ron Christmas was another company commander, and Mike and Ron Christmas had been our guests when I was teaching at College of Enlisted Military Education, and they did about a 1.5 hour presentation on Hue City, what it was like to be a company commander in Hue City. So, in fact, I'll see Mike for lunch on Wednesday. So he's in the book. And it's just a great cross section of men and women who had service in Vietnam. And because you get a whole generation of young men and women who know nothing about Vietnam because it's not taught.
Sure.
When they read about what was required of these nurses, doctors, pilots, and they're all in their 20s usually, you just kind of shake your head and say, how would I stack up? We used to read books and say, how would I do in Korea at 30 below zero? And I'm thinking, not too well. I don't mind the heat, but I hate being cold. But you can imagine being in a 2-man foxhole at night, 30 below zero. That's not fun. But they did it, and I mean, World War II, the same thing with The Greatest Generation Speaks. So before people raise their hand and decide to go in, they would be wise to read some of these reflections and books about what was expected of them. They didn't even know what was expected of them until it happened. And you think, wow, when I was 20 or when I was 19 years old, I did this, this, and this. And you're thinking, gee, I had no idea you had that kind of responsibility as a corporal or a sergeant. Now you're responsible. You are totally responsible for 18 or 20 men. Whatever success they have, you're a part of that. Whatever failures they have, you're responsible. They're your guys. How many people are willing to say, yeah, I'll be responsible for 18 people in combat, let alone 150 as a company commander or a battalion commander. I mean, you kind of separate yourself from the young guy on the ground with the rifle when you're a full bird colonel, but when you're a lieutenant, you are right there with them every step of the way. So things to remember.
Well, I mean, I think that's an excellent point that you make there, sir. I mean, I don't think that anyone could put that any better. I've had the honor and privilege of talking to and interviewing Lieutenant General Christmas on several occasions. Brilliant man.
He's
His
a
new
great
book
guy.
came out, The Needs of the Corps. It's phenomenal. And highly recommend it. I can get you a link for that, put you in contact with Lieutenant General Christmas after this if you're interested.
Oh, listen, I see him all the time. He comes up here. We're members of the Order of St. Crispin's, and I know Ron very, very well. Um, but I'll tell you, you're familiar with the awards that they have within the armed forces.
Yes, sir.
To give you an example, uh, my company commander was at that time a major named Alex Lee. Alex was a sixth generation Californian. Um, he had already been awarded the Legion of Merit, the Silver Star, Purple Heart. He was a test parachutist and test diver. Okay, so he was a company commander. Our operations officer was a first lieutenant named Clovis C. Kaufman, Bucky Kaufman, and you can look him up. He retired out as a colonel. When I met him, he had already received the Navy Cross, 3 Silver Stars, 5 Bronze Stars, and 7 Purple Hearts. He'd come up from the ranks from private to gunny, got a battlefield commission, and retired out of the Marine Corps as a colonel. Our executive officer was Norman Heisler, Korean War vet, Silver Star, Purple Heart. So all these guys had tremendous battlefield experiences, and they set up our classes, and it was really like a father and son relationship. It wasn't, I'm the major, I know everything, you guys are just a bunch of dumbasses. And it wasn't like that at all, because they recognized that everyone had something to bring to that team. You could be a brilliant radio operator, you could be a good corpsman, you could be great with a map and compass, and the other guy not so good. But the training kind of elevated you all to the same common denominator. But the officers set up training, knowing, what we were going to face by ourselves at night for 7, sometimes up to 10 days at a time. And they were back in the rear monitoring the radios and the maps. But the people back in the rear on the radios had all been in the field too. So they knew what questions to ask. You know, if the enemy is within 100 yards, key your handset once or twice or whatever the code would be. And they knew, do you have an egress route? Yes or no? Do you have a defendable position? Yes or no? Are there more than 5? Are there more than 10? Are there more than 50? That kind of thing. So I'll give you an example. I don't usually do war stories, but this happened. We were out on a mission, and we were on one side of a very large dry stream bed, and we saw 4 NVA come out of the vegetation and start to walk across that stream bed, headed in our direction. So the decision was made that we were going to conduct what we call a Gurkha-style ambush. And that ambush, it's simple. It's difficult, but simple to explain. Terrain dictates everything you can do. Okay, so you want a trail, and that trail has to take an immediate left or right-hand turn. So at that T intersection or L intersection, you put an automatic rifleman or machine gunner, and he's looking straight down that trail. Okay, the rest of the team is on, we'll call it the right side of the trail. Okay, and they're spaced out, but everyone can see everyone, so there's communication up and down the line. The team leader is on the opposite side of the trail, unarmed. So when 4 men are headed toward you, who is leading that team? Well, it's not the point man. Okay, it may not be the second guy if they're carrying a radio. Okay, it's going to be number 3, because the back guy is tail end Charlie. He's worried about what's coming up behind him. So the idea is, when number 3 guy gets directly across from the team leader, he's going to tackle him across the trail And at that moment, the machine gunner opens up and everyone else does. So we kill 1, 2, and 4, and now we've got a prisoner. We've got someone who is more knowledgeable than the other 3 guys, and we get an emergency extraction. So that morning, we're watching the stream bed. Here come the 4 guys, and we're all in line waiting for this to happen. Our gear is behind us, and it's pouring down rain. And not quite the last minute, but within a minute of them coming up to where we were on the trail that they had made, Furman calls for a freeze. So it's okay. Nobody do anything. So the 4 guys come by, followed by 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to 64. It was an NVA company on the move, heads down, going up this trail. And what separated me and Kevany from Bishop was 10 feet. And if you don't think that your heart is pounding so loudly that you think they can hear you, um, it was just great training that no one decided to say, let's take them or we surrender or anything like that. No one moved an inch. I mean, your face was buried down, your eyes were trying to look up. All it took would be the one guy to walk off that trail, looking for wood, make a head call, whatever, and we'd all be gone. But we didn't. And they moved on past us. And later we called in a flight of A6s to bomb them. And that's a whole nother story. That's in the first book. But that tells you the strength of the team and how good the training was. And no one panicked. Incredible. So, yeah.
Discipline there. I mean,
Yeah, it was great discipline. But I'll tell you what, after the last guy had passed by, we let about 10 minutes go before anyone moved because we wanted to make sure no one else was coming. Everyone was shaking like a leaf because of the adrenaline rush. It was as cold as you've ever been and shaking like that. Every one of us was trying to put on our gear, and you were just shaking with adrenaline. And
well,
but to the team's credit, no mistakes.
on that part, it's utter tactical brilliance. But while you were telling that story, it prompted a question that when it comes to ambushes and the rain, you can use that to your advantage just due to the fact that rain can mask sound. And at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, I assume, because while the rain is masking your sound, it is also masking the sound of whatever is moving towards you, unless you don't have eyesight on that, correct?
Well, for the most part, yes. But just imagine 65 men, all dressed pretty much the same. Let's just say it's a Marine infantry platoon, reinforced. Everyone's clanging and banging the same way. Chin straps, straps on the helmet, straps on your rifle. If they're not taped down, and the slogging of boots in the mud, it's a rhythm, you know. One guy, second guy, third guy, fourth guy. It's all cha-ching, 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 and you hear it. It's almost like a band coming down the street where all you hear are the drummers. No musical instruments, just the drummers, and you can hear it faintly and then louder and louder and louder, the crescendo, and then it goes away. It's the same kind of thing. But you're right. Um, Weather plays a deciding factor. Um, Thunderstorms, masking of sound, heavy rain, the monsoon, boy, I'll tell you what, it comes down as hard as you can imagine. The best thunderstorm you've ever seen in North Carolina cannot compare with 3 or 4 months of heavy rain like that every single day. So yeah, but you use that to your advantage, or you view it as a disadvantage. And as an example, we did not carry ponchos with us. Okay, why? Because it had a hood, and if you put the hood up, you couldn't hear. So no ponchos, no sleeping bags. You had a poncho liner, you know what those are,
Yes, sir.
and that's it. You rolled up in that thing, or you slept right beside someone as close as two little brothers in a bed, just trying to keep warm, and that's what you did, uh, just to conserve body heat during the monsoon. And it was you were soaking wet, and that's but everyone suffered the same. No one was high and dry, as we say, and not suffering from it. But I'll tell you what, those difficult times made for the unification of that team. Everyone had been through some very, very difficult experiences, but to this day, when you call someone on the phone, they're your brother. You know, you'd do anything for them. If a guy was in Alaska and he said, "Hey, I need to see you. I'm not well. I want to see you." You'd be on the next plane out of Dulles going to Anchorage. It for no other reason than that type of combat experience makes that unity.
Well, it's the bond too. I mean, speaking of the combat experience, sharing the hell of the terrain, that bond that's formed is unbreakable. I mean, and no one understands that bond unless they've been there. And a lot of people perhaps don't understand that of why, after 50 years, you guys haven't seen each other. Like once you see each other, you pick up where you left off 50 years ago.
Exactly.
You're
Exactly
back
right.
just like that. And I've been fortunate enough to attend a couple of Marine reunions of Vietnam veterans. It's one of the coolest experiences I've ever had of watching these guys come together. And in the beauty of that, you don't see guys in their 60s and 70s anymore. You see 18, 19, 20-year-old kids again.
And having gone to a number of these reunions, and I'll tell you, Third Force, a couple of Third Force guys are going to have reunion down in Jacksonville in May, is the rumor. Um, I don't know the place or the date, but um, you don't talk about the difficult times. It's always something funny, always something lighthearted. Um, um, Certainly, they will have a bell and they will ring the bell for the name of the deceased. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, what if there were no she's back then, uh, what would he be today? Would he be a lawyer, a doctor, a politician, a general? It made no difference what he would be because his life ended at 20 years old. And he may have shared that he wanted to go back to college or work for his father in a garage someplace or whatever. But you think, how terrible it was that his life ended and none of those dreams were realized and the ripple effect it had on his mother and father, grandparents, brothers and sisters, and aunts and uncles. And I don't know that we always think about that, of that ripple effect of one death, let alone us having, I think, 8 guys in 3 days killed. And these were like brothers to us. The remorse was incredible. And again, the lesson learned of what did they do right or wrong that caused this to happen. So that's a very painful lesson, but it was reality.
Well, and regarding those lessons, I actually was teaching an English class about this the other day. One of the English teachers asked me to come in and talk about Vietnam with the veterans I've interviewed. And, if you mourn the loss, but if you don't learn from that lesson of why your brothers, your friends died, then you suffer the same fate. You have to learn, and it's painful, and it's a lesson that sticks with you. Those are lessons you don't forget because they're hard lessons learned.
Well, the only benefit to that is, for me, um, I got out of the Navy, took a commission in the Marine Corps, and was able to teach not only as a platoon leader, as a company commander, as operations officer, and see the benefit of those lessons that I learned being passed on um, before, during, and after Desert Storm, and then into Afghanistan. I've got guys that write to me saying, "I'm reading your book as I'm flying over to Afghanistan." Um, Simple things that we did of lessons learned, and you pass that on to your own children and grandchildren. Um, and they kind of look at you like, you got to be kidding me. But you say, no, it's true, and And I guess the big thing is situational awareness. Be aware of what is happening around you all the time. You just don't walk with your head down. You're looking to your left and your right, and not in a, I don't mean in a way of paranoia, just to be aware of what's safe. You're not talking to someone and crossing the road. You're looking both ways before you cross the road, just because you want to be aware of what is happening around you. And if you can pass that on, and hopefully save someone from an embarrassing situation, then you're doing the right thing.
Well, and your legacy that you've created has definitely done that. I remember the first time I ever came across Doc Norton was on the internet, and it was former Marines talking about what Third Force Recon did in country, but also the impact that the Force Recon diaries had on their Marine Corps careers, had on them as Force Recon Marines, and the lessons that are still being taught from 1968, 69, and 70. They're still very relevant today in the world of the Force Recon world and the world of the Marines, anyways.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's good to know that you've made some kind of an impact, and hopefully uh, in keeping someone alive
Yes, sir.
or out of harm's way. So I'm happy with that. I'm also happy with what we're doing with this Voices from Vietnam in the way of educating people, because there's generations out there that don't know what happened. Not that this is all encompassing, but it's just a sample. Um, and people may want, I think there's a resurgence of interest in what happened in Vietnam. And I hope that carries through. Um, I don't know what kind of community theater they have in North Carolina, but I think it would be well received to put on a production like that. So, but we've got a website called Voices from Vietnam, and you can see the audition dates and the dates when it was going to premiere, and a lot of the people will be there who gave submissions, like Diane Carlson Evans. She's the nurse responsible for the nurses statue there at the Vietnam Memorial in D.C.
Wow.
Yeah, she's going to be there, and um, uh, Miss Sheen, her father was a pilot, Crusader pilot. He was killed. He crashed and was killed. All they got was a telegram saying, sorry to inform you, your husband, you, I'll make it up, plane crashed and is presumed dead. That's all she ever heard. That was it. As she grew up, because she was a little girl when that message came into her mom, she went to Vietnam. She found the pattern that he was flying in. She found the crash site and recovered her father's helmet. I mean,
Wow.
that's incredible. And she will be there. I mean, I'm just dying to meet some of these people that sent us submissions of vignettes or letters home or interviews or reflections. Uh, just an amazing thing. We think from time to time we had it bad. We didn't have it anywhere nearly as bad as someone who lost a husband, father, a brother, uh, body never reclaimed, never found. And you think, is he still alive? Is he being held somewhere? All this constantly in your mind. When will I ever see my dad? Will I ever see him again? And just heartbreaking. And so when you think you've had a bad day, you can't compare to the bad day those families had. And that's reflected in what they say in these letters and in these interviews that I've done. It breaks your heart. But
Well,
it happened in Desert Storm. It happened in World War II. It happened in Afghanistan. It's a terrible price to pay, but that's the price you pay for freedom.
it is, and it's one that needs to be taught too. I mean, since I've started doing this since May with Zoom, I've been doing a lot of these prior to just phone recordings and interviews, and sharing them with my students, and of course sharing them with the public on YouTube. I mean, I interviewed a Marine who I won't name, but it's in one of the interviews I've done, but he mentioned to me that the biggest gift that I had given him through this is that someone he went to high school with wrote him a letter. after one of our interviews and said, Mike, I'm sorry for how I treated you when you came home. I didn't know how bad it was. And he said that was the biggest gift he's gotten is, somebody who scorned him and called him a baby killer apologized 50 years later just because, of his story. And
Sure.
I think that's what people need to know is, well, what did you go through in Vietnam? It's not what the narrative is. What's the real story?
Well, I'll tell you what might make it interesting too is we should do one of these Zoom sessions with your class there and let them ask questions. Tell them about what we talked about so they'd have some, I say legitimate questions that they want to know. And I'd be happy to do that.
By all means, I'd be glad for that. The bell's about to ring, so if I mute myself,
Okay. Well, look, take care. And like I said, you know how to get in touch with me. And if you want to do that someday before school ends between now and June, I'm ready.
well, with that, and I'll ask you some things off the record. I got about 5 minutes. But to end this first official interview, Doc, I always do this. Thank you for your service and welcome home.
Very welcome.